Picture this. You're at work, trusting your father-in-law to watch your 5-year-old son when you get a notification on your phone. Your nanny cam has detected unusual activity. You open the app, expecting to see your son playing peacefully, but instead, you witness something that makes your blood run cold. Don't listen to your mom, buddy. She's too emotional. Women get worked up over nothing. You need to learn to be a real man. Those words, spoken to my innocent child by the man I trusted, shattered something inside me. This wasn't just casual conversation. This was deliberate manipulation, designed to undermine my authority as a mother and poison my relationship with my own son. I sat in my car in the office parking lot, hands shaking as I watched the footage replay. How long had this been happening? What else had he said when I wasn't around? In that moment, I realized that the man I'd welcomed into my home, the grandfather I'd trusted with my precious child, had been systematically working against me. My relationship with my father-in-law, Frank, had always been complicated. When I married his son David 3 years ago, I thought we'd found our rhythm. Frank seemed like the typical old-school grandfather, a bit gruff, set in his ways, but harmless enough. David always defended him with phrases like, "That's just how Dad is," or "He means well." But there were signs I should have paid attention to. The way Frank would raise his eyebrows when I set boundaries for my son, Tommy. How he'd mutter under his breath when I'd correct Tommy's behavior. The subtle eye rolls when I'd explain our family rules about screen time or bedtime routines. Back. In my day, kids didn't need all these rules, he'd say with a dismissive wave. We just let boys be boys. David would always smooth things over, caught between his father and his wife. He's from a different generation, honey. He doesn't mean anything by it. But I was starting to see a pattern. Frank didn't just disagree with my parenting. He actively undermined it. There were the small moments that, looking back, should have been red flags. Like when I'd tell Tommy no more cookies before dinner, only to find Frank sneaking him treats in the kitchen. Or when I'd explain why certain TV shows weren't appropriate for a 5-year-old, and Frank would wink at Tommy and say, "What mom doesn't know won't hurt her." I'd tried to address these incidents with David, but he'd always minimize them. "Dad's just trying to be the fun grandfather," he'd say. "Isn't that what grandparents are supposed to do?" But this felt different. This felt calculated. Frank wasn't just being the indulgent grandfather. He was deliberately teaching my son to disrespect me. And the worst part? I had no idea how deep. This went until technology gave me a window into what was happening in my own home. The day everything changed started like any other Wednesday. I had an important client meeting, and David was traveling for work. Frank had offered to watch Tommy after school, just like he'd done dozens of times before. I felt grateful. Having family support meant everything to a working mother. I'd installed the nanny cam 6 months earlier, not out of distrust, but for peace of mind. It was one of those discreet cameras that looked like a regular picture frame positioned on the living room shelf. Most days, I never even checked the footage. But that afternoon during my meeting, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I assumed it was just Tommy and Frank moving around, nothing unusual. It wasn't until I was driving home that curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled over to check the app. What I saw made my hands tremble. Tommy was on the couch, crying over something, probably a scraped knee from playing outside. Instead of comforting him, Frank was lecturing him with a stern finger pointed in his direction. "Stop that crying right now." Frank's voice came through my earbuds, clear as day. "Your mother babies you too much. She's turning you soft. Real men don't cry over every little thing." My heart pounded as I watched my 5-year-old try to stifle his tears, confusion written all over his little face. But Frank wasn't done. He sat down next to Tommy, his voice taking on a conspiratorial tone. "Listen, buddy, between you and me, your mom gets too emotional about everything. Women do that. They can't help it. But you're a boy. and boys need to be tough. When she starts her crying and carrying on about rules and feelings, you just tune it out. Don't let her make you weak like her. I watched in horror as my son nodded, solemnly, soaking up every poisonous word. This wasn't discipline or grandfather wisdom. This was deliberate psychological manipulation designed to drive a wedge between my child and me. 20 minutes of footage. 20 minutes of systematic undermining, gender stereotyping, and emotional manipulation. 20 minutes that explained so much about Tommy's recent behavior changes. His sudden dismissiveness when I tried to comfort him. His new phrases like, "That's girl stuff," when I'd try to discuss emotions. Frank had been poisoning my relationship with my son, one visit at a time. That evening, after Frank left and Tommy was in bed, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, systematically going through weeks of nanny cam footage. What I discovered was worse than I could have imagined. This wasn't a one-time incident. This was a campaign. In clip after clip, I watched Frank systematically undermine my authority. There he was, telling Tommy that real men don't play with dolls after I'd specifically bought Tommy a baby doll to help him process becoming a big brother. There he was, mock whispering that Mom worries too much when I'd left instructions about Tommy not jumping on furniture after he'd sprained his ankle. The most damaging footage was from 2 weeks earlier. Tommy had asked Frank why Mommy sometimes cried during sad movies, a perfectly normal question from a curious 5-year-old. Instead of giving an age-appropriate explanation about emotions, Frank had launched into a 20-minute lecture about how women are just more emotional and how Tommy needed to be the strong one and not let female emotions affect him. Watched my innocent child absorb these toxic messages, his little face serious as he nodded along. Frank was literally programming gender stereotypes and emotional suppression into my son's developing mind. But the smoking gun came in a clip from the previous month. Tommy had fallen off his bike and come running inside, tears streaming down his face. Instead of offering comfort, Frank had actually scolded him. "What did I tell you about crying? Your mother isn't here to baby you, so stop acting like a girl. Big boys handle pain. Your dad never cried when he was your age." Then, Frank had done something that made my blood boil. He'd pulled out his phone and started recording Tommy's tears. "Maybe I should show your mom how you're acting. She'll probably cry right along with you." The humiliation in my son's eyes was heartbreaking. He was 5 years old, hurt and scared, and instead of receiving comfort from a trusted adult, he was being shamed for having normal human emotions. I found evidence of Frank contradicting my dietary rules, my screen time limits, and my bedtime routines, always with the same underlying message that Mom's rules were unnecessary because Mom was too emotional to think clearly. The worst part was discovering that Frank had been coaching Tommy on how to hide things from me. "What happens at Grandpa's house stays at Grandpa's house," he'd say with a wink. "Mom doesn't need to know about everything we do, right, buddy?" I had 16 different video clips spanning 3 months. 16 pieces of evidence showing systematic psychological manipulation of my child. Frank hadn't just been undermining my parenting. He'd been deliberately damaging my son's emotional development and teaching him to deceive me. The man I'd trusted with my most precious treasure had been systematically poisoning him against me. The next morning, I confronted David with the footage. I expected shock, outrage, immediate support for protecting our son. Instead, I got deflection. "Honey, you're overreacting," David said, barely glancing at the laptop screen. "Dad's just old-fashioned. He doesn't mean any harm." "Doesn't mean harm?" I replayed the clip of Frank shaming Tommy for crying. "He's teaching our son to suppress emotions and disrespect women. How is that not harmful?" David sighed. The same dismissive sigh I'd heard countless times when it came to his father. "Look, I'll talk to him, okay? But you're being too sensitive about this. Boys need to learn to be tough." That phrase, Too sensitive, stopped me cold. It was the same language Frank used, the same dismissive, minimizing tone. I realized with growing horror that Frank's influence extended beyond just Tommy. David had been conditioned his entire life to dismiss women's concerns as emotional overreactions. When I insisted we needed to set firm boundaries with Frank, David got defensive. He's my father, and he's not going to live forever. I'm not cutting him off over some comments about parenting. Some comments? I pulled up another clip, this one showing Frank teaching Tommy to lie to me about eating candy. He's systematically undermining my relationship with my son. But David was already shutting down, and I could see I was fighting a losing battle. That's when Frank called, as if summoned by some paternal radar, wanting to know if he could take Tommy to the park that afternoon. Absolutely not, I said firmly. Frank's voice turned cold. Excuse me? I said no. You won't be watching Tommy anymore. The silence stretched before Frank's voice returned, loaded with threat. I think you're forgetting who you're talking to, young lady. Tommy is my grandson, and I have rights. David's not going to let you keep me away from him. Watch me. That evening, Frank showed up unannounced. When I refused to let him in, he began pounding on the door, shouting about his rights as a grandfather and how I was being hysterical and destroying this family. Tommy cowered behind me, terrified by his grandfather's explosive anger. Anger that revealed Frank's true character when he couldn't manipulate the situation. I'm calling the police, I warned through the door. Go ahead, Frank shouted back. They'll see right through your emotional nonsense. David will back me up. He knows you're being ridiculous. But when the police arrived, Frank's demeanor instantly shifted. He became the concerned grandfather, worried about his unstable daughter-in-law who was having some kind of breakdown and keeping him from his beloved grandson. I watched the officer's expression soften as Frank played the victim, painting me as an over-emotional woman having a mental health crisis. Without context, without seeing the footage, I looked like the unstable one, the hysterical mother making mountains out of molehills. That night, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my relationship with my son. I was fighting for his psychological well-being, and I was completely alone in this battle. The police incident was a wake-up call. I needed professional validation and legal protection. The next morning, I contacted a family attorney who specialized in grandparents' rights cases. What you're describing is called parental alienation, Attorney Sarah Chen explained after reviewing my footage. The systematic undermining of a parent-child relationship through psychological manipulation. These videos are compelling evidence. She helped me understand my legal rights. While grandparents do have some legal standing in custody matters, they don't have the right to psychologically damage children or undermine parental authority. Document everything, she advised. Keep those videos safe and start logging every interaction. We may need a restraining order if this escalates. I also contacted our pediatrician, Dr. Martinez, who had been Tommy's doctor since birth. When I showed her select clips, her professional concern was immediate and validating. This type of emotional manipulation can cause lasting psychological damage, she explained. Children this age are forming their understanding of relationships, authority, and emotional expression. What you're showing me is concerning enough that I'd recommend immediate intervention. Dr. Martinez referred us to a child psychologist, Dr. Rebecca Torres, who specialized in family trauma. After meeting with Tommy and reviewing the footage, her assessment was devastating. Tommy is showing signs of emotional confusion and conflicted loyalty, Dr. Torres explained. He's been programmed to suppress natural emotions and question maternal authority. The good news is he's young enough that with proper intervention, we can help him process this healthily. She provided a written assessment documenting the psychological harm Frank's behavior could cause. This gave me professional backing for my concerns. I wasn't being too emotional or overreacting. I was protecting my child from documented psychological abuse. When David continued to minimize the situation, I made a difficult decision. I filed for temporary custody modifications that would require supervised visitation for any extended family members, including Frank. The court filing got David's attention in a way my conversations hadn't. Suddenly, he was taking this seriously. Not because he finally understood the damage his father was causing, but because legal intervention made it real. "You filed papers against my father?" David was incredulous. "I filed papers to protect our son," I corrected. "The fact that you can't see the difference tells me everything I need to know about how deep this problem goes." The court hearing was scheduled 3 weeks later. Frank had hired his own attorney, painting me as an unstable mother having a breakdown over normal grandparent behavior. He claimed I was keeping Tommy from him out of spite and jealousy, but technology doesn't lie. Judge Patricia Reeves watched 20 minutes of carefully selected footage in her chambers. I'll never forget her expression as she witnessed Frank coaching my 5-year-old to hide things from me, shaming him for crying, and systematically undermining my authority. "This is not typical grandparent behavior," Judge Reeves stated firmly. "This is systematic psychological manipulation of a minor child." Frank's attorney tried to argue that the recordings were taken out of context and that Frank was just teaching the boy to be strong. But the judge had seen enough. The court order was comprehensive. Frank was prohibited from unsupervised contact with Tommy. Any visits had to be supervised by a court-appointed monitor. He was ordered to complete a parenting education course, focused on child psychology and appropriate boundaries. Most importantly, he was forbidden from making any comments about me, women, or emotions during visits. Frank exploded in the hallway after the hearing. "This is ridiculous. You've turned the courts against a man who just wants to spend time with his grandson." His attorney quickly pulled him aside, but the damage was done. His public outburst in front of court officers only validated the judge's decision about his inability to control his behavior around children. The ripple effects were immediate. David's family, who had initially rallied around Frank, began distancing themselves after learning about the footage. His sister called me privately to apologize. "I had no idea Dad was saying those things," she said. "When I think about how he talked to me and my daughters when we were growing up, I'm so sorry I didn't believe you at first." David himself underwent a reckoning. Faced with professional assessments, legal documentation, and his own family, turning away from his father's behavior, he finally began to see the pattern of manipulation he'd been raised to normalize. "I'm sorry," he said one evening, tears in his eyes. "I spent so many years thinking his treatment of women was normal that I couldn't see it happening to our son." Frank's reputation in the community crumbled as word spread. His longtime poker buddies began questioning his character. His church friends asked uncomfortable questions. The man who had wielded emotional manipulation as a weapon suddenly found himself isolated, facing consequences for behavior he'd never been challenged on before. Justice felt bittersweet but necessary. 6 months later, Tommy and I are in a much healthier place. Dr. Torres helped him understand that crying and having emotions are normal and healthy. We practice talking about feelings regularly, and I've watched his natural empathy and emotional intelligence flourish without Frank's toxic influence. "Mommy, why did Grandpa Frank say those things about you?" Tommy asked during one of our talks. "Sometimes people say hurtful things when they don't understand how to handle their own feelings," I explained. "But that doesn't make those things true or okay." David and I are in couples counseling, working through generational patterns of dismissing women's concerns. It's hard work, but he's committed to breaking the cycle for Tommy's sake. As for Frank, he completed his court-ordered education but still maintains he did nothing wrong. He sees Tommy once a month under supervision, but the relationship is strained and artificial. Tommy, with his 5-year-old wisdom, seems to sense that something fundamental has changed. The supervised visits are awkward and brief. Frank struggles to connect with Tommy when he can't undermine me or promote toxic masculinity. It's sad, but it's also protective. I've connected with other mothers online who faced similar situations with undermining in-laws. Creating a support network has been healing for all of us. Looking back, I'm grateful for that nanny cam notification that changed everything. Sometimes technology gives us the gift of truth we desperately need. To the mothers watching this, trust your instincts. Document everything. Your children's emotional well-being is worth fighting for, even when you feel alone in the battle. Have you ever caught family members undermining your parenting? Share your experience in the comments below. You're not alone in this struggle.